Well, welcome back to another episode of R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me in the room, Greg Brinson. I appreciate you making the trip out to the podcast studio today, and welcome to R4E.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm glad to be here. It was good to get into LA and do the drive through traffic to see you. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I always forget how crazy the traffic is here. And I was telling you before we started filming, I sat in traffic for an hour and a half yesterday. So nonetheless, I'm excited to be here with you. Appreciate you making the trek out.
Sure.
We exchanged notes for a little while to get here today. And I guess just by way of background, we first connected in probably around early pandemic 2020 or so on LinkedIn. You obviously have an incredible LinkedIn presence and sharing financial models, different pitch decks, and it was very appealing for me and my learnings. And I know a lot of my colleagues and peers in my network leverage your tools as well.
Sure.
But that's to say, we were connected back in 2020, and then when I was making the trek out to LA, I was going through my connections on LinkedIn and saw you were out here and fired off a cold DM, and here we are today. So excited to dive into your story, your career, your time at CapLinked now. But maybe before we do, I want to talk about your walk-up song, and I'll give you a little bit of background. As you know, I have all my guests select a walk-up song to really kind of get the conversation started. I feel like conversations about music and understanding someone's taste in music is a really good outlook and understanding of their personality that you that might not necessarily see at face value. And so the walk-up song for you is Hall of Fame by The Script. And that song for me was always special. I think it came out in, call it 2012, 2013. And I distinctly remember there was I think it was an Omega commercial that Rory McIlroy starred in. And that song always, and that was right when I was getting into golf. And that song was on repeat in my head. And I think the message of the song is fantastic. It actually just popped up on my Spotify a couple of days ago for the first time, just serendipitously. So I'd love to understand why that song's important to you, because it sure is for me.
Yeah, and I think I inherited that one from my wife's playlist. It somehow ended up on my phone. I used to do a lot of running, so minimum 100 miles a month. Most months it was 120 to 140. And that was kind of my finish song. That was just such a motivational song. The story behind it's great. The lyrics are great. But just the music itself, it just gets you so pumped. And I'm a child of the 80s, so, there was Eye of the Tiger back in the day. That was the song. But I compare this to that. And again, the lyrics, they say a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you're not necessarily striving for a sports Hall of Fame, but your own Hall of Fame. So we set our goals, we try to achieve it, and that's our Hall of Fame. So I kind of listened to those lyrics, and like I say, it was my last half mile. That's what I'd listen to, because it kind of helps you finish strong.
That's terrific. Like I said, super nostalgic for me. And when I saw that in your note you sent yesterday, it really just struck a chord. So that's a great one. If you don't know the song, definitely check it out, because it really is just special. For me, it's for the background with Rory McIlroy. But interesting to hear that's at the end of your run. Are you still running your 100 miles a month now?
I'm not. My knees told me that it was time to slow that down. So I had to take a lot of time off running. I'm trying to slowly get back into it. I should try to get back into it faster than I am, because I do need to drop 10 pounds, but I'd like to start again.
Well, maybe we use that segue. You were a runner for a little bit. Before that, you were on skates as a hockey player. Maybe get the audience up to speed on maybe the quick elevator update of Greg Brinson, who you are, where you came from, and then we can dive into your story a little further.
Yeah, I never knew that I would end up in Los Angeles. I grew up in Canada, a smaller city of about 70,000 people, and any young guy living in Canada, you got to play hockey. So I did. I played on the rep team, the traveling hockey team. Your goal is always to get drafted. Nobody from my team ever did. I had an older brother. One guy from his team got drafted. They were number 3 in the country, I think. So it just shows you how hard it was. But when I drew the conclusion that I wasn't going anywhere in hockey, that was kind of the end of my career. So that's where things finished up with my hockey. But played a little bit of pickup hockey after I was done with that. But now being in Los Angeles, a little more difficult to put the skates on and play. So
certainly. And so you grew up outside of Toronto, if I remember correctly. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
And is your family still up there, or are they back in LA with you, or down in LA with you now?
Yeah, no, my mom and dad, brother, his wife, 2 kids, they're all up in our same hometown. So
fantastic. And what's the name of that hometown?
Peterborough, Ontario. Big hockey town. So,
okay, very good. Now what NHL team do you support? Is there a Canadian hockey league that you?
I always grew up supporting the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yep.
I was born in '70. They won the last cup in '67. They've never been to the finals since 1967. So when you're rooting for a team for over 50 years and they haven't made it to the Stanley Cup final, it makes it tough. But I'm gonna stay on with the Leafs.
Now I'm from the DC area, so I resonate with the lack of championships or lack of playoff appearances. We had a good run right before the pandemic with the Nationals baseball team and the Capitals, but I'm right there with you in the drought. But okay, so you were a hockey player by nature, by trade, growing up in Canada. I feel like, to your point, very very natural upbringing there.
Sure.
Was that really like your goal and aspiration growing up as a kid, teenager? You wanted to go play professional hockey?
Yeah, I think in the back of your mind, that's what you're hoping for. And again, you see players in the city that are getting drafted, older players than myself. So it is a goal of yours. So that's, we played great teams. We had great players on our squad, but at that time they were starting to pull players in from overseas, Sweden, Finland, Russia, all these other places. So the competition became stiffer.
Interesting.
And again, when I saw that only one person from my brother's team got drafted, that was the early indicator. It may be very difficult. And our team wasn't as good as theirs. So we didn't get the scouts watching us like they did either. So
Got it.
That's again, where it all ended.
So you hung up the skates maybe from a professional aspiration standpoint. What was your next pivot, or what was the next step for you in terms of getting your career started?
Yeah. So, when I finished high school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And in Canada, in Ontario at the time, they had grade 13 is what you went to. So you'd finish high school, closing in on 20 years old. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I didn't go into college immediately. Every summer, I'd work construction. So when I finished that school year, parents didn't want me sitting at home doing nothing, so I had to go do something, and it was going back to a construction job that I'd worked every summer.
Okay.
Hard labor, long days. It taught me a lot of good lessons in life, but that's where I ended up after high school for a couple of years.
Interesting. Now, while you were in your construction role, were you really trying to work and figure out a way to get out of that lifestyle, try to get out of the manual labor, or was there were you kind of just going through the motions, enjoying where you were? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was young. I was living at home. I didn't have any bills, and you're working long days, but your weekends are off. Unlike when you get into professional careers like we're in now, your weekends aren't always free. So you had a definite schedule, and I just carried on. I don't know what would have happened had I not had what I explained to you and what we'll talk about in a little bit. If that hadn't happened to me, I don't know how long I would have carried on with that. Or where I would have ended up. I may have just ended up staying in the hometown to this day. So that was definitely a pivot in my life that changed direction.
Yeah, let's dive into that then.
Sure.
So, I mean, as you know, the premise of this podcast is trying to understand inflection points, changes in people's lives that occurred to them, whether voluntary or involuntary, that got them to where they are. And so the first one you highlighted was the injury that occurred while you were in that construction role. So if you'd be kind enough to maybe just share a little bit about that and how that kind of pivoted your life trajectory from there.
Yeah, like I say, that was the one that did definitely pivot it. We look back and we wonder where we would have ended up. And I thank God that I hurt my back because I could have still been there. I'll probably mispronounce it, but it's called spondylolisthesis, which is your spine sliding off your tailbone. So I was lifting a sheet of plywood with my arms extended in front of me, and I jerked it, and I felt an immediate snap in my lower spine, and the pain was just unbearable. So the spine slid halfway off the tailbone. And at that point, didn't really know what it was. I hadn't gone to a doctor. You just figure, okay, I pulled my back. I've hurt my back before, and I should be fine. So I took a week off work, went back the following Monday, and I did the full day's work. And then the next morning when I got out of bed, I couldn't even walk.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I rolled out of bed, and I was only crawling on the floor at that point. So that was the end of my construction career. That was the very last time. The day before that was my last day of construction.
Wow. And so what was that recovery process like? So were you... so you, I guess at that point we're obviously done with construction. Were you really kind of lost in trying to figure out what the next step was, or did you immediately know you were going to go make the jump into finishing school? What was that like for you?
Yeah, they put me into the workers' comp programs. They start paying you because you injured yourself at work, and they try to put you through some level of rehabilitation. You've got to meet with them on a regular basis, and they kind of come up with a plan for you, but it's not necessarily the plan you want. If I recall correctly, this is 30 years ago. They wanted me to go in to become a computer repair person. And I mean, I hadn't taken computers in high school. It was at that age where computers were just really being introduced to the student body. So you could opt into courses if you wanted. I didn't. So I didn't know much about computers. And it's like, I don't really want to be crawling around under desks, fixing people's computers and installing mainframes or whatever it is you're doing. So I told them I've got a program in mind I'd like to go to. And their response was, if you take your own program, we're not going to pay you anymore. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to take my own program, and you can stop paying me, and I'll do what I want to do instead of what you're telling me to do.
The irony of it is how involved you are in the tech ecosystem today.
Yeah.
But so you ended up going to your own program. What was that program that you were interested in that you opted out of the workers' comp?
International business. So I went to a college in my hometown to study international business, which is import-export regulations, and kind of had a career path in mind that I was going to go into after that.
Okay. And so you wrap up school pretty quickly, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And what was the first step after graduation for you?
So as we were kind of closing out our graduation, there was this large firm or large freight forwarding company that always brought in graduates of our program to go into a management trainee program. So I had an in. I knew somebody that worked there from my hometown. I'd been friends with him for a few years. So he got us in early, me and a couple buddies of mine. Kind of beat the line, which the professor wasn't too pleased with, to be truthful. But we got in, we got our interviews done, and then everybody else got their interviews. And I got the call that I didn't get the job.
Really? Okay.
Which was a shock. So, I mean, I thought I was a shoo-in to get this job, well qualified, graduated with high grades, and I thought I interviewed quite well, but I didn't get it. So I was, stuck. I had to find myself another job at that point.
And were you living at home at this point?
No, that was the other side of it. 6 of us had kind of rented this huge house just outside of Toronto, and I had rent to pay. So I hit the phone book. That's where I started. Opened up the phone book and started cold calling to get a job. And then through some other networking I was doing, I got an interview at another company. They were considering bringing in a new salesperson. They decided they weren't going to expand at that point, but somebody I had met at that company, she had graduated from my program a couple of years prior, and she put me in touch with another company that was hiring, and I got a sales job.
Okay. So that was your first, I guess, white collar job, if you will.
Yeah.
And what was that transition like, going from the ice rink where it's, again, whoever can hustle the hardest on the skates and probably hit the hardest and the best kind of skill set there, to the construction job where, again, physical labor, long days, open weekends, to this desk job? Was that transition easy for you, or were you in a little bit of shell shock at that point when you were at the desk and underneath the fluorescent lights?
No, I kind of went into it well. I guess I was always outgoing, friendly, and that's why they hired me into a sales position. I hadn't considered sales at that point. I thought I was going to be at more of a desk job where I'm not going to be out meeting with people. I'm going to be doing paperwork, this training program that I expected to get into. So they just told me, you've got to go out and meet with these group of people and try to sell them our services. And I did. I had no fear. I was young. You just pick up the phone and start calling people. And it was a limited book of business that we had to approach. And you started to make friends with these people over time, and they started sending business our way. So it turned out great. I consider it one of the great loopholes of life. If you've got that outgoing personality and entrepreneurial spirit, sales is great. And 30 years ago, people kind of frowned on it. I remember a friend asking me when I first got into sales, well, what do you really want to do though? Once you're done sales, it's like, well, this is what I want to do. It's great.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, the friends of mine that got into the management trainee program, I ended up in my first year making about 3 times what they were. Again, this is 30-year ago money, but I was succeeding more than they were in terms of monetary and just sheer enjoyment, because I was able to get out of the office every day, drive around, meet with people all day long. Well, they drove to an office, stayed there 9 to 5 at least, and then got in their car and came home at night. So I had a level of freedom, which I appreciated, and that's kind of what got me into sales and kept me in sales.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that point you made up about the kind of cheat code, if you will, of sales, where it's just a great way if you're, to your point, an outgoing person, or you just like interpersonal relationships. It's a great way to. It's very natural. It's one of the few jobs where I feel like a personality can just fit right in with the proper wheels and framework in place. And so. Couldn't agree more with that point. Now, what were you guys selling at that point? I feel like I guess it is a blend of personality, but you also have to be selling the right product and really believing in that. So what were you selling that you were able to 3X what your colleagues in the management training were making?
It was air cargo sales.
Interesting.
So I sold space on airplanes to ship cargo all over the world.
Very niche.
We were a cargo sales agent, so we represented a lot of different airlines. Out of Canada, we actually represented UPS, which was one of our biggest ones, selling all their empty space that wasn't full of packages. I think these days with Amazon, they're all full of packages. I don't know if they do much of that anymore. Saudi Arabian Airlines, Malev Hungarian, so mostly foreign airlines, and we would sell the excess space that they had on their planes leaving Canada to go back to their home countries.
Very interesting. And now, knowing your career trajectory, you've really kind of stayed in some pockets or some niches of very random subsegments of different industries. So maybe get us up to speed from the air cargo role to Iron Mountain. What was that journey like for you? Because I feel like anyone that's been in an office, seeing a trash can rolling around, quickly realize
Sure.
that it's not full of garbage, but it's a bunch of materials going to get shredded. So
Yeah.
maybe get the audience up to speed about that transition for you.
Sure. And it's not a sexy business by any means. It's not exciting. But I had left the air cargo company. Just they kept changing the comp plan on me. So every time I would start making great money, they'd either bring in another sales rep and split my territory, or change the comp plan so you made less money. So again, it was a great experience. I learned a lot from it, and I'm still in contact with the president of that company, the owner of that company. To this day, we message on occasion. So at any rate, I had to look elsewhere. I wanted to find something with a little more stability where I could achieve my goals and know that I'm going to constantly make the money and not have that plan change. So I went into headhunters, and they put me in touch with, at the time, it was Pierce Leahy was the company that ended up merging with Iron Mountain years later. So I originally went into Pierce Leahy Archives. Again, they were the second largest. Iron Mountain was the largest. And after being the Pierce Leahy company for several years, that merger occurred. So that was a 16-year career that I spent there.
Okay.
And that's what got me to Los Angeles. It was 17 years ago now that I was successful in my sales roles, sales management roles. And they needed somebody in Los Angeles or Chicago were kind of the options that I had to interview for. And I thought, well, Chicago's pretty close to Toronto, and it's much like Toronto.
Right.
And I still got to get on a plane to go home and see people. So I'd rather be in Los Angeles and enjoy the benefits of the weather, as well as having a great job at a good company that I enjoy being at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, as a quick note or branch to the side here, so while this part of your life trajectory is going on at Iron Mountain, where were you in life? Were you still in Toronto? Were you, so I guess you transitioned to Los Angeles, you mentioned, for the next role, but when did you meet your wife? How did you guys get connected in the first place? What was going on for Greg personally at the time where you're building out your sales repertoire?
I met my wife, I think it was after I hurt my back.
Oh, really?
So yeah, it was early 20s.
Okay.
We've been together 30 years. We just had our 30-year dating anniversary, actually, a few weeks ago. Last weekend, we had our 23rd wedding anniversary. So we met in our small town, just out one night, and I took a shine to her from across a bar and asked her for her phone number, and she wouldn't give it to me. So fortunately, her friend gave it to me, and I called her the next day. So that's when we got together.
Too funny. I thought it was going to be a long sales cycle pursuit by you, just giving the full kind of 360 sales cycle for your dating life. But no, that's cool to hear. And so you guys are together through this time while you're building your professional career and resume there.
Mm-hmm.
What was that jump from Iron Mountain to CapLinked like now? And maybe get everyone up to speed on what CapLinked is. And like I said before we started filming, I'm familiar with the business just given our respective overlap. But what's that business like for you today, and how is that transition for you?
Yeah, and I went to another company in between Iron Mountain and CapLinked. I spent 4 years there. It was all right. I didn't love the job. Well, that's all. It just wasn't exciting for me.
Yeah.
It was hard to be successful in just the way the business was run. So I left that company, and I took time off. I had time on my hands, and at that time, my wife and I bought a small condominium out in Palm Springs, and I started working on it, just spending my days renovating a condominium. So I could afford to do it.
Back to the hard labor.
Yeah, exactly. So I gutted it. I rebuilt the entire thing myself, all the drywall, all the painting, electrical, tiling, did it all just to, accomplishment. Again,
Certainly.
That was my Hall of Fame. Again, back to that.
Right.
I wanted to be able to accomplish that goal. But in the midst of that, a headhunter contacted me. So they had the CapLinked opportunity. And I had no idea what a virtual data room was. Having come from Iron Mountain, we had physical data rooms.
Right.
We stored all the paper.
Of course.
And if somebody was doing diligence, they would come to Iron Mountain facility and they'd pull all the boxes and they'd come in and review those contents. And at the end of the day, they'd pack it all up. The people would leave and the boxes go back on the shelf. So I was used to that type of data room, but I hadn't been exposed to a virtual data room. So they told me what it was. I did a little research on it, 2 interviews, and next thing you know, I was employed at the company.
Terrific. And now in your role as CEO, again, it's I'm sure very different than working the phones, dialing through the phone book back when you were on the air cargo role.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of natural overlap or I guess even just general progression that goes from the sales desk to the role of an executive that you're in now. But what was that transition like for you from going from maybe managing a territory or managing teams to managing the full shop? What's that like for you now?
I'm still merging into that. It's only been less than 2 months, I think, that I've been in the CEO role.
Right.
I was intern for a period of time, but multitasking, doing a lot of everything, which we're still a smaller firm. So everybody does help everybody else out. We certainly have our dev group that kind of sticks to their own stuff. I can't help them with their things. But as far as customer support, if I'm at home at night and something comes through, I'll respond to it myself. I want to make sure we're on top of that and kind of lift the weight off the shoulders of the customer support people themselves. Excuse me. So like I say, I'm still working my way into it, figuring out, what direction we need to go with the company, what we can do to increase our velocity of growth. We've had significant growth since I started 5 years ago. But of course the goal is to continue that. So that's what those are our plans, is try to figure out what we can do just to speed that up and get in front of the right people.
Absolutely. And super helpful just getting everyone up to speed on your career and life trajectory. But now I'd love to dive into some of the hows and the whys. So in your role now, did you ever expect, when you were in your manual labor job in construction, did you ever expect you were going to be one, on a podcast, but two, even just work in the role of as a CEO? Did you ever have that in mind? Was that your goal and aspiration when you were just starting out, whether it be as you're laying in bed recovering from your injury or starting on the sales desk?
Yeah.
What did you have in mind for what your career was going to look like, and has it lived up to expectations, exceeded expectations? What's that like for you?
In the back of my mind, I always had high expectations.
Yeah.
I didn't always know what path was going to get me there. When I was younger, I had a friend who had dual citizenship, Canadian, US, and he lived in Canada, and that's where we had met. And at that time, I wanted to get to America. I didn't know why. It was more opportunity, I think. And back then I kind of dug into it. We didn't have the internet like we did today. I forget how I even tried to figure out, how you could get to America without being a US citizen.
Right.
But that was kind of a goal that was in the back of my mind. And it's like those things. If you write things down, if you read the right books and listen to the right audio programs, you program yourself to achieve certain goals. You don't always know you're working your way towards those goals, but over time you achieve them. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Tracy.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So I went to his first time I went to see him, I was 16 years old.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. My mother had tickets. She was sent from her work. She had 2 tickets, and I drove her up to Toronto. So saw him that time, and he just put me on the path of, listening to audio programs, reading books, educating yourself. As he always says, now your car should be a rolling university, right? You've got a CD player at the time. You can, use your USB now and just play different audio programs. So I pre-programmed myself for success, I think. Did I think I'd become a CEO in Los Angeles? No. I mean, I never thought I'd end up in Los Angeles of all places, right? It's a great city and a great
very
place
different
to be.
than Toronto in many aspects.
Yeah. And then to fall into a company that things just worked out, that I ended up, being appointed the CEO was fantastic and goal achieved. So unknown goal though. Again, I knew I'd make it to upper level management. I wanted to. I shouldn't say I knew I would, but that was my goal. So this has just been fantastic.
Oh, well, there's so much there I want to unpack and explore a little further. And the first point, you said the importance of writing things down. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of my other conversations I've had with folks, and a lot of my episodes where I've been reflecting and unpacking on those episodes, really interested in, and I've done my own reading and background research on the idea of manifestation, speaking into existence, and everything kind of in that realm. Were you ever consciously writing your goals and aspirations down and using that as a, call it, target board or wish list? Or were you ever actively doing that, or was it kind of just a passive activity for you?
I used to have a little packet of cards in my pocket, and I'd pull that out whenever and just read them. It was just goals at the time. What's my income goal? What am I going to be making a year from now? What car am I going to be driving? Where am I going to go vacationing? Just a lot of things. And I should try to find those if I still have them, because I'd love to go back and see which of them I achieved. I'm sure I have achieved them all at this point.
Right.
And now I need to write down new ones. But no, I did. I had vision boards. I probably within the last few years, I had vision boards that I put together. So
really?
Yeah, I constantly, set goals and work towards them.
What's that process like for you now? And is that something that you heard from Tracy, or is that from other folks that really kind of turned you on to that?
Yeah, mostly Brian Tracy.
Yeah.
And I've met him personally probably 3 or 4 times since I was 16 years old. Been to a number of his conferences since then. But yeah, he's kind of been the mentor that I followed for all these years, and just, followed his advice and wrote things down and created a path to success.
Yeah, 100%.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think people discount those things, right? You read a few books and you don't recognize that reading those books or listening to those programs helped you achieve the goals. So you kind of stop doing those things, but then you stop achieving the goals as quickly as you did before. I think some people think it's just a fluke that was working for you. So they stop doing it. And I suppose I could say I'm kind of guilty of that myself right now because I'm not reading as much as I should be. I'm not listening to as many audio programs. I haven't listened to an audio program in a long time now. So, just based on our conversation we're having now, I probably should get back to doing some of that. Instead of driving back and forth from Palm Springs to LA, listening to music, I should be listening to some great podcasts and educational materials.
No, it's a great point that Brian Tracy brought up about the just rolling education, rolling library. Well, I don't remember the term that you mentioned that he said.
University on wheels.
University on wheels. Yeah. But I mean, so here's the thing that I've been exploring and thinking about further, because I'm also under the impression that I always think when I'm just listening to music or obviously balancing that time with just time of solitude, where I try not to listen to anything at all and just digest my thoughts, right, and try to enjoy the solitude of it all.
Yep.
So it's balancing that with, one, there's a ton of great content out there, from podcasts to audiobooks. Yeah. My friends and family give me a hard time because I don't watch enough of the TV shows that are out there. There's a couple of random ones that I'll keep up with, but all that's to say, what I have found, though, is sometimes when I'm thinking that the podcasts or the audiobooks that I could be using to educate myself in my downtime or in my idle time on the road, at the same time I'm thinking, and one of the ideas that I've been exploring is that idea of speaking into existence and manifesting. And a lot of the music that I listen to, whether it be Hall of Fame or some of the other songs, I'm a huge Drake fan. I talked about that in my last episode. Yeah. And a lot of his songs in the early days, he's talking about how he's on the come up. He's going to be the best rapper of all time, super successful. And then now he talks about his successes and looking back down the mountain.
Sure.
And a lot of times, I think about this a lot of they say that your subconscious is constantly getting programmed from your social media or from your music or your input. Yeah. And I think about that a lot with the music that I listen to and all of my inputs, from TV shows to music to podcasts. Long-winded way of saying, I think that even the music that you might be listening to, I think there's a huge impact of what you're listening to, repeating in your head, having stuck in your head all day. I think there's something to be said about listening to positive, focused, motivational music the same way, like Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that kind of reminds me too, Brian Tracy said it, many other people have said it too, but you're the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with as well, right? Yep. So it's not just the books you're reading, the things you're listening to, but the people you're surrounding yourself with. And
that's a great point.
I think that's a great lesson for a lot of people out there.
That's a great point. Who do you spend the most time with of those 5 people? Could you think of that list now?
Definitely my wife, but I'm just, it's entrenched with work at this point. And again, I'm holed up in my condominium in Palm Springs doing my work. So I don't see a lot of people these days. And I think that's a function of COVID.
Right.
I used to do a lot of networking with ACG here in Los Angeles. They'd have monthly events. I'd be going out to all of those. And once COVID kind of wrapped up, I suppose it's still going, but when people started getting out again, I wasn't going back to those types of events. So I do need to get back into doing those things.
What's ACG? I'm sorry.
Association for Corporate Growth.
Got it.
Yeah, so they're nationwide. So a lot of investment banking firms go to those. It's just a good networking opportunity where they serve you a little bit of food and some beverages. You listen to a panel speak about, current transportation industry, aerospace, pharmaceuticals. They always have a great topic to talk about with some specialists from those industries.
Okay, got it. And then so you used to go to those conferences. Now, by function of COVID, you're in your Palm Springs condo now. Yeah. You mentioned COVID, and I want to finish your answer of the other people you spend your time with, but while we can dive into this for a second, you mentioned COVID. That's really when we first got connected on LinkedIn, and I feel like that was probably a huge catalyst for you and your growth on your LinkedIn following. What was that? Was that a very quick hockey stick like growth in your LinkedIn follower growth, or what was that journey like for you? And when did you realize, like, holy cow, I have this massive audience now that is waiting for me for my next post?
Yeah, so we do work with a firm that they source the information that we share, and then once people start responding, and we've had some that have gone viral for LinkedIn standards. I mean, 2 million impressions, 8,000 people requesting copies of these things. So my mailbox starts going nuts. And at that point, I start getting into LinkedIn, responding to people and keeping that going. But it took a while, for that to start to build up. I think at this point I'm at 30,000 followers, and I think I've got 18,000 connections or something like that. Probably 13,000 of those have come in the last 2 years.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a hockey stick. And then, people like, repost, share, and that just kind of generates even more activity. So
have you recognized any direct, whether it be top line, bottom line growth from your just personal network? Has there been any leads that have come in for you from LinkedIn?
There have, even more so now with the CEO title, people are more willing to respond and get in touch with me.
Interesting.
It's a little frustrating at times though, because you see the same people that are requesting assets from me on a regular basis. And then, you drop them a quick note and say, hey, by the way, can we have a quick conversation about virtual data rooms? And then you don't hear back from them. So that happens a lot. But I don't blame them. They're busy people. And a lot of firms are entrenched with the software and the platforms that they're using. They don't want to make a change necessarily. And again, they've got to determine how they're going to invest their time. So, and then there's a lot of campaigns that we run as a company. We work with Wall Street Oasis, Zero Hedge. We're doing a lot of promotions with all of these firms now that we've just started doing in the last probably year or so. And with those, sometimes it's hard to measure, right? Because somebody contacts us and we don't know how they contacted us, but it could have been, and we don't always remember to ask, how did you hear about CapLinked? So it, could have come through any of those sources. Same with LinkedIn. They may look me up on LinkedIn and then drop us an email and say, hey, I want a data room. So
hard to see the direct funnel when it's coming in that way.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this. So you're still in a quasi sales role as chief executive, but knowing what you know now, knowing the dynamics that are in play, especially in today's day and age with the current rising interest rate environment, a lot of especially tech-oriented firms or businesses that are really getting really crunching down on their tech spend, maybe going through headcount reductions, needing less licenses for tools like CapLinked.
Sure.
And you're putting your sales cap back on. What's the advice that you give to your sales team now, or really anyone that's going out there selling a product or service in a lot of industries where there are austerity measures that are in play right now, where people are really being more focused on their spend? What advice do you have for the average salesperson to really kind of break in and continue to grow, just given the current kind of difficult climate?
Well, I'll say that we've been fortunate because we are a lower priced platform, a more reasonably priced platform compared to some of the legacy platforms that are out there. And through COVID, we saw significant growth. In the last 5 years, we've had 2x growth on the company, and a lot of it coming through COVID. And a lot of it was because firms were looking to spend less, but get the same functionality.
Interesting.
So that's where we saw a lot of business coming in, was just, a lot of different firms didn't want to spend what they used to have to spend. I won't name the names of the platforms, but they've been around a long time. There's some expensive ones out there. And for a lot of the mid-market and lower deals that we work with, they don't need the functionality that a lot of those platforms have. They keep adding more functionality you have to pay for, but people don't need it. So they're kind of looking for alternatives.
Interesting. How about just generally speaking for just young sales folks? What advice do you have for them? And again, and just in the current economic climate, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. A lot of vendors that are selling to the same pools of client base.
Sure.
What advice do you have for a young salesperson today?
I think as far as just working for any company, it's going above and beyond what your job description calls for. That's where I've seen a lot of my success, whether it was the air cargo sales business, being at CapLinked at this point. When I came in, they just wanted me to go out and sell. And I kind of looked at everything and revamped the entire process we had, all of our pricing plans, et cetera. These weren't things I was asked to do. Even when I was at Iron Mountain, I started producing videos for my sales. So I bought a green screen, I bought cameras, editing software, everything I needed, and started filming videos so that I could convey my message through emails with somebody so they could click a link and watch the brief video. Now there's systems and platforms that do that quite easily, right? You can film yourself in your office without a green screen and do all the things I did. This was, a decade ago, they didn't have all of that. So I've just tried to always do things above and beyond. And when I started at companies, if the start time was 8, I was in at 7:30 or 7 or whatever the time I could be in, and then extend my days. So never limiting myself to the work day that they told me was the official work day.
Right.
You've got to put in extra. And I think that's in every job you're in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned kind of just going above and beyond. Balancing that with, you met your wife when you were pretty early in your career.
Yeah.
You were running and you're probably still staying physically active in some way. How do you balance the age-old question for people in the millennial Gen Z demographic group? But how are you balancing work-life balance? How are you kind of mandating that to the folks on your team? What is your mindset like around work-life balance, work-life integration, whatever you want to call it? How are you able to check off all the boxes and that you need to do, one as Greg the CEO, but also as Greg the husband, the golfer, which I want to dive into, and all the other things that you like to do outside of work as well.
Yeah, and of course my wife is the most important, the one that I need to make sure that I'm paying the most attention to outside of all of those things. And again, my workday is extended because we do deal with countries around the world, clients in countries around the world. So I could be on a call at 7 in the morning or 9 o'clock at night. And during the day, if I've got an hour available during my lunch, I can jump in my golf cart and go hit a bucket of balls just to make sure I'm getting out and working out some frustrations and getting a little bit of exercise as well. So I think that part's important. But yeah, like I say, just spending time with my wife, who, we're apart a few days a week while she's having to go into the office and I don't. So we just try to make the best of the time that we can spend together and do things together. Which is important too. So we play pickleball. I'm at that age where, it's one of those things we've started to do now, a lot of hiking as well. And then for my team at work, I want them to have the work-life balance as well. Sometimes they have to respond to inquiries after hours as well. But if during the day they want to go and have a workout, I think they should be able to do that. They can work that into their schedule. So I don't tell you have to be at your desk all day if you've got other things to do, and we're 100% remote now. So we have great people that we trust. They all get their jobs done, and that's what's important at the end of the day.
Interesting. And then I guess before pre-pandemic, I'm sure you were going to an office pretty regularly.
Yeah.
What was that transition like to you? Again, I guess back to the question about who you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
Your wife is one.
Yeah.
Who else is on that list, and how are you able to kind of keep the interpersonal relationships going when Zoom calls don't always cut it?
Yeah. So again, with the technology we have now, it's fantastic because one of the people I spend most of my time with, but not physically, would be my best friend, growing up in high school with. We're texting every day. We stay in touch. So
terrific.
That's one of those people. My wife, the president of our company, we, talking constantly, meeting frequently. So he's another person I spend a lot of time with as well.
Do you think that there's going to be any sense of full return to office in any time the rest of our lifetimes, or do you think that the remote hybrid work is here to stay?
I think it's certainly enticing, and if companies have to offer that up as something to get the best talent, it's something they may have to do. I know there's a lot of companies that have tried to get a little more strict with it, and I think there's an agreement between the employee and the employer. The employer does get to tell you what to do.
Right.
And even some of them, they told them you have to come in 2 or 3 days a week, and they were up in arms about that. But that's not a lot to ask of somebody who's, we've spent 5 days a week for the last bunch of decades working in an office. But from departing our office, again, everybody was together in a small office where we were before. So we always see each other. We have great conversations and enjoyed each other's company. And then we went out after COVID hit. We stayed in touch. We had our weekly town hall meetings or happy hours. We'd get on a Zoom call at the end of the day once a week just to, chat and see how things were going. I think a lot of companies did that. And over time, it became a little bit monotonous, right? We got a little tired of it. So we spread those out. But we still do our town halls monthly, make sure we're having those conversations. And then, again, with technology, we can stay in touch with everybody all the time.
Of course.
Which, again, 30 years ago, if COVID had hit, I don't know how we would have got business accomplished, right? Just with Zoom,
good point.
Internet, email, everything we've got now. When I started work, email was just kind of starting. The internet was just kind of there, but you didn't really know what it did or how it did it. So yeah, it's been a big change that has been certainly beneficial to all of us through the last few years.
You certainly weren't going to be taking off on LinkedIn, and when you were first starting your career, whatever the closest version of that to me was probably the the Rolodex. Some people's desk. It's probably hard to go viral in a Rolodex.
Right, exactly.
But it's interesting. I mean, I feel very fortunate in that. So I graduated undergrad in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I had about 6 to 9 months of true 5 days a week work experience, and I was in consulting, so I was traveling to client sites. So still really didn't get that full every single day desk job, same spot.
Yeah.
But it was still 5 days a week. You were expected to be in person with your team. Pandemic hits. Back to the office now, but it's pretty interesting. My undergraduate class of 2019 was really the last batch of students that ever saw a traditional work environment.
Right.
And it's interesting, even the undergraduates that have just recently graduated that have started work since, they're never going to really understand or see. And that's not to sound like someone that's very pro work from home or anti work from home, but it's just interesting that class of 2019 that I'm obviously very fond of is the last class to see the full kind of gambit of being in the office with the team 5 days a week.
Yeah, and all the way back to my construction days, I think that gave me, a good experience in terms of work ethic and knowing what could be, because I worked in concrete is what we did. We poured floors. We also did, cutting and coring and all this other stuff. But when you pour a concrete floor, you don't just get to go home at 5.
Right.
If it's not hardened up and done, you stick around. So that could be, 12, 15-hour days, and then getting back up at 6 in the morning to get to the office, get to the shop at 7 a.m. And you were never late. You couldn't be late. When somebody was late, they got fired. So again, there was no such thing as being late, which I think taught me a lot of good lessons through my life and helped me get to where I am.
Certainly. And you've shared a lot of interesting lessons so far, but maybe as we round out here, what would have been maybe some of the key learnings, key lessons that you've been able to extrapolate from your kind of career of ups and downs, different sales roles, even in your construction? Are there any kind of key lessons that you're constantly kind of reminding yourself of and looking back on a regular basis?
Yeah, and I think it goes to, what your whole podcast is about, is you can't always control everything in your life that's happening. You make decisions and you can look back on them and say, yes, that was a good one, or that one wasn't so good. Maybe it's the school you went to or the program you decided to take. And there's other things like, hurting your back,
right.
Which you can't, foresee that. It's just something that happens in your life. But there's a lot of people that have things happen to them and they just think that this is the end of the world. It's an unfortunate situation, but different things happen and the suicide rates are incredible these days. People have bad things happen and it's hard to convince them that things are going to get better. And I, got kicked in the guts a few times when I didn't get that job, when I hurt my back. I just felt like, gosh, what am I going to do and where am I going to end up? You just got to keep moving forward and set goals and keep working towards those, because it's not the end of the world.
Certainly, and couldn't agree more with the concept idea of keep going and moving forward. And you don't know what's around the corner for you, positive, negative, or indifferent, but you just have to keep one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
To that end, you mentioned goals and aspirations. We talked about your note cards you used to keep in your pocket. How about top of mind now? Are there any kind of key goals, whether it be through work at CapLinked or even just in your personal life? Is there anything in particular you're working towards or looking forward to as we round out 2023, which sounds crazy, but round out 2023, get into 2024. Yeah. What's top of mind? What's the top of the to-do list for Greg, maybe personally and professionally?
Yeah, so personally, I as well am an avid golfer. I've been practicing hard. I've got a friend of mine who was a pro caddy on the PGA Tour.
Oh, very cool.
He was an instructor as well for a pro golfer. I won't mention names, but this was in the 90s. So he's walked all the great courses, carrying the bag for a pro golfer, the Masters, the U.S. Opens, everything. So he's done it all. So he's been coaching me, kind of got me to the next level with my golf game. And what I'd like to do is enter a qualifier for the Senior U.S. Open. I planned to do it this year. My game fell off a little bit, and then we had a vacation. We went to Malta in Italy, so I wasn't able to accommodate it this year. So hopefully next year, next spring, my game is where I want it to be, and I can enter the qualifier without embarrassing myself.
Oh, that's super exciting.
I'm not expecting to finish first in the tournament, although I should be setting that as my goal.
Right.
But I know how good these guys are these days. So I got close to scratch. I'm a little bit higher than that right now, so that's the personal goal.
Oh, that's super exciting.
Thank you.
Where's your favorite course you played?
Oh.
Loaded question, I know, but if there's any top of mind.
Yeah, and there's just so many around Palm Springs that I enjoy playing, and they're in such great condition at different times of the year. So out there, Indian Wells is really a great course, but I've played a couple private ones out there that I got the benefit to get onto, one being the Vintage.
Excellent.
And the other was El Dorado. So both very private courses. I only got onto them in the middle of summer when nobody's there. That's when somebody can get you on that knows people. And those were just unbelievable tracks. They're just in perfect condition all year round, and you're catered to like you wouldn't believe. So really enjoyed those ones.
That's terrific. Well, I'll keep a lookout next year on the U.S. Senior Open scoreboard when I'm seeing your name crawl to the top of the leaderboard. I mean,
I hope so.
It sounds far-fetched, but look at the guy Michael Block this year on the PGA Tour for the PGA Championship. I mean, no one knew who he was, and he just was a good personality and a very talented golfer, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's exciting. That's your personal goal. How about professionally for CapLinked? What I know you guys are really starting to turn the corner. You're cash flow positive now.
Yeah.
What are you excited about? What's top of the vision board for Greg and CapLinked right now?
Growth, fast growth, increase the velocity of growth. We're doing all the right things. We're getting in front of all the right people. We're getting a lot of new clients. One of the big four just signed a contract with us this past 2 weeks ago, I suppose it was. Small deal, but when you're signing any of the big four, and we've got others that have done work with us as well, you're doing the right things. So if we can just find ways to get our foot in the door with all these investment banks, private equity firms, and get them to give us a shot, that's the goal. So we've got to establish the plans to get there. And like I say, I think we're doing all the right things in terms of getting that. I know that people love the platform. Most of our business, or much of it, comes from people leaving one firm, going to another where they'd used CapLinked. They introduce the new firm, that firm starts using it. So it's just a case of getting people to try it. So we're going to keep working hard on using technology to get in front of the right people to grow the business. And someday there'll be an exit. I don't know when that will be. That's up to the president and founder to decide if and when that happens. My goal is just to keep building revenue for the company and giving everybody a good life that works there.
Unbelievable. Well, for those of you who weren't familiar with you before the show, they are now. Huge fans of you, I'm sure, at this point. But where can they find you on social media? How can they get in touch with you?
Really only on LinkedIn. So just look me up on LinkedIn, Greg Brinson. I'll give you my email address as well, because like I say, some days I can get hundreds of messages coming through the LinkedIn DMs, and I miss messages all the time. So they can always reach me at work at gbrinson@caplinked.com.
Perfect.
And you can post that within any of the links that you're sharing with the videos as well. They're welcome to drop me a note directly.
Yeah, I'll be sure to plug that in the show notes.
Sure.
Greg, I greatly appreciate your time, and hope you enjoyed your time on R4E today.
I did. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.